at tonight's Farm and Woodland Forum talk to have two speakers, and we're going to do this throughout this entire kind of series of talks because oh, hang on a second. Sorry, I'm getting a transcript rather than a recording. Okay, no, just transcript and recording. Apologies. It's just slightly distracting. Yeah. Oh, where was I? Oh, yeah. Tonight's talk for all the for the whole session that we're going to do in the run up, which will be monthly in the run up to the kind of agroforestry show. We're always going to have two speakers, one talking to kind of cropping, top fruit type trees, and one coming at farms, trees on farms from more of a forestry perspective. So that's what we've got for you tonight. So we're very pleased to welcome James and Marina. So James Ramskir-Gardiner, which I've hoped I've pronounced correctly, works for the Forestry Commission as an agroforestry advisor. He's part of the cross-departmental team currently working in designing and developing agroforestry offer for elms, which I might quiz you about later, James. And so James is going to be our kind of forestry representative this evening and our first speaker. Marina is director and co-founder of the Apricot Centre at Huxham's Cross Farm here in Devon. She has an excellent skill set when it comes to sort of top fruit, having run market gardens and their current kind of farm and veg box delivery scheme. She's also written a great book called Designing Regenerative Food Systems, which I would encourage everybody to peruse if you haven't already. And so the order for tonight is going to be James is going to speak first for about 20 to 25 minutes. And we'll then hand over to Marina for a sort of similar length of time. If you've got any questions, if you can put them in the chat so the speakers can look at them and we can get to them at the end of the session. But then we'll finish off with a Q&A. So we're aiming to go for about an hour and a half this evening. But yeah, if I can invite you to step in now, James, please.
Lovely, thank you. Let me just share my screen. Oh, there we go. Lovely, thank you, Harriet. So yes, I'm James Ramskir-Gardiner, agroforestry advisor for the Forestry Commission. Thank you so much for having me talk. I feel actually really quite privileged to be like the first speaker of this series of events. That's really lovely. So I'm very appreciative that I'm here to talk to you guys tonight. I'm going to talk to you about trees on woods. Trees on farms, even not trees in woods. The opposite, trees outside of woods is what we're going for.
James, you're on mute.
Yes, I am. I do apologise. Did you miss absolutely everything I said?
We got to trees on farms and then we missed everything you said from then on.
Okay, I didn't say anything important, don't worry about it. So obviously you've all come here from Farming Woodland Forum. So there's going to be a whole range of knowledge of agroforestry within this group. So apologies for anyone that I'm going over everything, teaching you to suck eggs, as it were. I want to make this as accessible as possible. So to start from the beginning, agroforestry is purely farming with trees. And this can be from hedgerows with trees in it, through the whole spectrum to what we think of more traditional farm woodlands and kind of everything in between. We like to generally describe it as in-field or around field as a design.
And you're on mute again, James.
Yeah, no, okay, sorry, I've worked out what it is. I think I fixed it. Brilliant, there we go. Sorry about that. So for me, the absolute key starting point you would look to put agroforestry on your farm is, what is your objective? That should be you know, we could talk about systems and design choices for hours, but without knowing what your actual objective is with your farm or your land, with that we've got to start from that point. So those objectives can be you're looking to get a timber product out of the system. You're looking to create shelter and shade for your livestock. You're looking for additional fodder material. You're looking for potential biomass for fuel and energy on the farm or to sell into the wider market. Biodiversity benefits and carbon sequestration, which are really important and valuable features these just come as natural byproducts of a well-managed system. I would never really advise for them to be the leading objective for a system, because they will come along. Whether you plan for it or not, as long as you're well managing that system, you will get those benefits. And that for me is absolutely one of the absolute cornerstone reasons why I love agroforestry, is it brings so many benefits to the farm. When it comes to a farmer's own drive for tree planting, we need to think about locational input on your farm. You know, is it a wet? Is it dry? Are you on fertile land, infertile land? What's the exposure like on your farm? These will all feed into the species choice and design system that you choose. Some systems may be to mitigate some of the maybe more negative conditions you might have on your farm, whereas some might be to capitalize on those particularly productive areas that you have. So we're going to go through an example field that we have here. We've got a 5-hectare intensively managed pasture field. And this is what we're going to be using as our example slide today for looking at different possible arrangements that you could put in place. So the first one we're going to look at is hedgerows. Now, hedgerows are as old as farming itself, near as damn it. We are they give us brilliant they give us windbreaking, shade and shelter possibilities, as well as utilizing by planting potentially small corner areas of each of these fields, where you can increase the tree numbers that we have across the field without giving up particularly much acreage at all. These kind of smaller, more sheltered fields are suitable for managing lambing, for example, as well as separating livestock, and they can include future manageable woodland grazing components in the corners. I will touch a little bit more on woodland grazing a bit later. The hedgerows themselves can be an excellent source of additional fodder for livestock, increasing mineral uptake, and with willow, for example, allowing for self-medication of livestock with the salicin component within the willow. The next system that we can put in place is what in-house myself and my colleagues are referring to as kind of wide agroforestry hedges, or a smaller version of a shelter belt, you know, a windbreak. These are brilliant. They could be between kind of 5 and 6 meters width, you know, around that. They're brilliant for biosecurity between fields. They avoid the nose-to-nose touching of livestock, helping to prevent transmission of diseases such as TB across neighboring farms. You can have a core row of a timber-producing tree through the middle of the design here. And I must credit my boss, Jim, with this beautiful line drawing in the top right corner that demonstrates it wonderfully, what I'm referring to. I'm really interested with Italian or red alder as that potential core tree. These would grow really quickly to create a high canopy windbreak, as well as providing quite substantial chip or biomass from about kind of year 15 to 20 onwards, as well as fixing nitrogen into the soil for soil improvement. There's also potential for conifer species such as Scots pine within this core row. And then on the outer edges we have here, you could put in a mixture of palatable species along the edge, again providing fodder for livestock. I'm afraid this is going to be a continuing theme for me with a lot of these systems. I love that additional benefit for the livestock from a fodder point of view. Or you could plant a more traditional kind of mixture of hedgerow species and actually laying the hedges to avoid any kind of future refencing requirements. You just have a laid hedgerow along either side, which is brilliant for supporting the kind of more rural rural crafts, which are kind of unfortunately slowly dying out. There we go. So next one is we could put in a more dense woodland canopy. And you see here it's split. You see, I hope you can see, sorry, these small dashed lines running down. A system like this, I think, would work brilliantly for this mixture, allowing for a mob grazing system, which allows similar access to both pasture and tree fodder for the livestock, whilst using this mob grazing system. The woodland component of this scheme you could manage in a continuous cover forestry system, a CCF system, to provide a steady supply of timber, as well as continuous shelter for the livestock. I think a productive birch mix could work really well here, and the benefit. It's unusual to think of CCF systems and grazing going hand in hand, because inevitably the livestock will eat all the natural regen that you're hoping to capitalize on. But with what I like the idea of is with a mob grazing system, because you've got these, it can be quite, lengthy periods of rest before the stock are back into that area. During that rest period, maybe a day or two before you're planning of the stock going back in there, you can identify potential natural regen and put the correct guarding in. I truly believe it could work. It certainly would be a fun system to play with. So, woodland grazing and quality timber. Now, this feels like such a no-brainer, to be honest. We've got such a brilliant climate in this country for growing productive broadleaf timber. And we've got so much woodland that is in dire need of managing. I believe at last count is something like 40% of our country's woodland is currently unmanaged. It would be absolutely brilliant to grow more broadleaf timber, to get those woodlands into management, as well as providing additional grazing and all of the shelter and shade benefits that come with that, and really mixing those together. So that could be done by converting existing woodland on the farm to a grazed woodland, or if you're looking to create initially, you could do some planting, kind of around the 2,500 stems a hectare stocking density. You prune it from year 4, some formative pruning. You can start grazing the woodland from year 10. Appreciate this is species specific. Correct guarding is going to be a must for this. And then as those trees grow, you thin it out and you manage the light level for the grass sward as well as for the actual timber growth. Species wise, this is going to be very dependent on the local suitability as well as the market within the area. I really believe that a forester or a silviculturist specialist's input is going to be very important for this kind of system. And a real key note is that the grazing level has to be managed just as it would be on pasture. Overgrazing can and will cause deforestation. And along with that, other than the loss of habitat, it will bring regulatory issues along with that. A really good woodland grazing toolkit is available from Scottish Forestry. Not sure I should be quite promoting the sister organisation, but it's a really great toolkit. I'll have an example of that up a bit later on in the slides. Oh, apologies. There we go. There's a couple more pictures. There we go. So as you can see, canopies managed to benefit both the grass sward as well as the timber quality there. There we go. So a more kind of regular system, kind of an even spaced tree system in field here, allows for fairly simple grass sward management, especially if you're looking to cut for a hay crop. And the trees themselves, you would be looking to high prune them and potentially thin them where necessary once the canopy cover gets big enough. Again, it's all about managing the light. It's absolutely about managing the light. I remember listening to Stephen Briggs talk a couple of years ago, and he just talked about farmers and foresters. We're all the same. We're just farming sunlight for a different product, and it's such a key component to any of these systems. It's absolutely managing that light level. Um, I'd say you definitely got to be aware of the palatability of tree species here, and the potential negative effects on livestock as well as the positive benefits. There is work currently underway to centralize palatability information for easy access. Um, because it's just such a core component if we're looking to introduce more and more tree species onto the farm. For example, sycamore can be so easily very highly toxic to horses, for example. They really have to ingest very few sycamore seeds to have a quite dire reaction. And then again, dependent on the livestock that you're farming, the trees may require permanent guarding in a system like this. I'm afraid I've seen some goats left to run amok, cause some absolute devastation to trees. You know, you think squirrel ring barking is bad, but when it's a goat that's done a good solid 2-foot strip all the way around all the trees, it's quite something to see. So we come to shelter belts. The irony of most farms in this country, I'd say, would already have elements of agroforestry on there without maybe necessarily knowing. And shelter belts makes a core component of that. There's lots of research out there on design and effects of shelter belts. Key element is they can shelter up to 12 times the tree height, providing all of that welfare and productivity for the livestock. Productive conifers mixed with broadleafs, I think, are really suitable for shelter belts. They provide a year-round sheltering, both obviously in the winter with the conifer element, when we're seeing some more and more storms coming in now, and some potential resilience to winter storms rather than putting in like a pure conifer stand. In the latest issue actually of the Quarterly Journal of Forestry, there was a really brilliant article on optimal shelter belt design, which I can highly recommend a read. It's absolutely fascinating, and they're really looking at the porousness of that shelter belt, to allow it to survive our kind of more extreme weather events that are coming. And this is just demonstrating, sorry, the kind of the positive benefit that you can have here from a shelter belt on the crop. Apologies, I am very much focusing on livestock through this. That's a habit from being the majority of farming I've dealt with. A lot of that shade and shelter benefit can be equally applicable to an arable system. Speaking of, excuse me, I'm not going to touch too much on the fruit and nut component here, as obviously Marina is going to cover that in a moment. But I'd like to talk about general guidelines about space from tree to an arable crop. For a fruit tree, we'd be looking as a general rule of thumb to allow about a 1.5 meter either side of the trunk. Whereas if you've planted trees in this row system for a timber producing tree, we'll be looking to allow more for 3 meters either side of the trunk. This allows for a minimal kind of unwanted pruning of the trees by the passing machinery, as well as allowing the roots to spread far enough for tree stability before being pruned by cultivation. The suggestion of kind of a wildflower mixes going into these strips under the trees is quite a nice one. It certainly helps with benefiting pollinators, which can further help with the arable crop. Whereas a tree alley system, whether it's out for arable or for pasture, actually, could be really suitable for coppicing systems, as you could look to cut a row each year for the product, without reducing the shelter and shade benefits for the field overall. Just got to be aware that the resprouting growth will need protection from grazing, even in an arable system. Encouragement for deer management across the whole farm system will definitely help with this, as well as benefiting the crops themselves. Apologies, there we go. absolutely. So it can definitely be a more complex system to manage. This comes back to with a lot of these systems, you need to seek the specialist advice to go along with it, because we're mixing two complex systems together to make them even more so. As well as your market in the local area. This is especially important if you're looking to put in I think a fruit system. But again, I'll let Marina touch on that. Again, I'm not going to steal Marina's thunder here, other just to say that grazing goes really nicely with an orchard. That was all I wanted to say on orchards. So as you can see here, woodland creation. So the potential for additional woodland grazing can be created here, as well as squaring off the field itself to allow for an easier sward management. Again, introduction of coppice systems into these areas for a continued supply of fencing material by planting either like a sweet chestnut or a black locust. Or you potential for more firewood or biomass chip for the farmhouse, or even just a winter tree hay crop, again with willow or black locust. Really interested in black locust as a species for agroforestry use, as it is incredibly versatile, both from a forager's fodder as well as a timber point of view. And then this leads on to some of the more kind of less formal agroforestry, such as wood pasture and parkland. I think of this as a very landscape-friendly option for introducing timber or fodder products into the farm. It's a great opportunity for oak in this system. You could look to manage some of the oak you plant with high pruning to create a really good quality future hardwood, whilst leaving others potentially to just grow naturally and spread, as we can see here on the left of the screen, to provide that shelter and shade, benefit the stock as well as the habitat around that goes with that kind of naturally grown veteran tree. This is a really good option when it comes to being kind of landscape friendly, as some of these rigid systems can be quite, oh, apologies, didn't mean to move that, can be quite strong on the eye. And here we're looking at maybe some of the more ecosystem services that we can get from a planting system. So a riparian corridor, absolutely brilliant for protecting watercourses and reducing runoff. But you might be able to see it clearly. Sorry, there is a watercourse running through this area here. It buffers the watercourse with trees and kind of shrubby vegetation. Brilliant for reducing runoff during wet weather events. And as well as can be managed and utilized as further grazing during appropriate times of the year. There we go. So as you can see, before all clear, no protection from runoff. And here we go, absolutely slowing the flow there. Oh, sorry, my mouse has got very sensitive. I do apologize. Here we go. Here's just a kind of nice visual example of what like a low density planting system can use, or can look like, sorry, using a kind of a non-uniform layout here, which is maybe far more appropriate to the landscape with some of these more visible fields, where they're kind of higher up along the horizon here. As you can see, this is what roughly 30 trees a hectare looks like, which is not much at all, but provides ample areas of kind of shelter and shade there for the livestock. So this is a really important point with agroforestry in the United Kingdom, is that the benefits are certainly for silver pasture are, they might seem obvious from a common sense point of view, but there are very few kind of hard facts and data to back up a lot of this. whereas we have got anecdotal accounts from early adopters. One such is the Mains of Fincastle, a farm in Perthshire here, where they have added plantation planting, providing shelter for their stock. And this is just this pure addition of the shelter has allowed for them to run a more productive mixture of breeds. As you can see here, you know, the cattle absolutely love woodland grazing. They love the shelter and the shade as well as the sheep. And now the sheep are out on the high ground all year round, and they are saving a substantial amount of money on annual feed. And without the shelter that the trees are brought here, they just would not be it wouldn't be viable for them to run a Texel cross at all. The kind of the last area I want to quickly touch on when it comes to whatever system you're putting in is that it's really important to consider our changing climate and the uncertainty that's going to come with that when planting trees, regardless of the system that we're putting them into. The choice we make with the seed province is vital to this. On the right-hand side here, you see a seed province map of the United Kingdom. This just dictates the kind of the locational source of that seed. As you can see here, using on the left here, using the climate matching online tool, the link of which is there on the screen, we can see that what areas currently have the predicted climate for a different area. So what I've selected Peterborough completely at random, as you see demonstrated by the tree here, and we can see that the predicted climate for Peterborough in the year between 2040 and 2060 is going to be such as certain areas in the UK currently a bit further south, but more noticeably much further south on the continent. So areas of northern France, northern Germany, even coming down to Bordeaux and the more southern areas of France, with all of our kind of predicted climate models. Using this information, I would be looking to select tree stock from a mixture of provinces. So using both the current province for Peterborough, which, as you can see here, is 402, and a mixture of tree supply from northern France and Germany. This would give my, whether it's shelter belt, wood pasture, or a wide hedgerow, it would give it the best fighting chance of surviving the changing climate and the associated impacts that would come with that, such as pests and diseases. As I'm going to see here, it's just another quick example of the future suitability of both oak and Sitka spruce in the UK, just demonstrating that we really need to be thinking about the future when we're planting our trees, and what might be suitable now might not be suitable when it's looking to reach maturity. This is really important to consider if you're looking to get a decent timber crop out of the tree. Here's just a list of help and guidance. I'm sure with Harriet's assistance, I can get the links and stuff out to you all afterhand. The first and foremost, I'm sure it's the same for everyone. The Agroforestry Handbook. It's the closest thing we have to a Bible at the moment in the UK for this. The Woodland Grazing Toolkit through Scottish Forestry is an absolutely brilliant resource. There's some great information from the Organic Research Centre. Plenty of access to past and present studies that they're carrying out. The Landworkers Alliance is a brilliant organisation with so many passionate people championing this kind of change in land use and looking at more integrated land use across the country. We've got demonstration sites across the country, some most of which are open over this Agroforestry Open weekend coming up. The Agroforestry Hub, which has another great resource for designing and information. And I've got to plug the Forestry Commission at the end here, I'm afraid. We are currently expanding our forestry team. We are looking to have local advisors in the area, hopefully by the end of the year. But as well as utilising the current local area teams that exist, especially when you're looking for that timber input, as we're an organisation of foresters and specialists. Now, I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to read through everything here, but there are plenty of benefits for trees to the farm alongside timber. The real key thing I'd like to pick out on here is that the future elm support for agroforestry is planned for launching next year in 2024. We're currently working on it. However, I would say the time for planning what systems you want to put in place is now. You know, you have a good year ahead of you to really think about what would be best for your farm. And with that, I would like to do the final plug of the agroforestry show. And thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you so much, James. Although I think you'll find you're missing a link to the Farm Woodland Forum website on that slide of yours. Might want to update that one.
You're absolutely right. I felt as everyone was here from there. I'm sure you know it, but you're absolutely right. The Farm Woodland Forum is a brilliant resource in and of itself.
Tim just put his hand up. There are some questions in the chat, but the intention was to get to them at the end of the session. But Tim, is it a really quick one?
It was just a thumbs up, really. It wasn't a hands up, so I'll retract it instantaneously. Go on to the more important questions.
All right, fabulous. Well, we'll save the questions to the end, but thank you for those people that have put questions. And if you do have questions, please do put them in the chat. James will be reading those through while we hand over to Marina. He's going to come at agroforestry from more of the kind of cropping tree perspective and give you an idea of what to consider when you're picking out the trees for the systems that sort of James so eloquently outlined for us. Thanks, Marina. I'll hand over.
Thank you. Hello, yeah, and thank you for inviting me, Harriet. And it was very interesting, James, to listen to what explore agroforestry from more forestry aspect. I know that sounds a bit silly, but being a fruit grower, and most of the agroforestry I do consists of fruit trees. So I'll just share my screen. So what I was going to talk about was, let's see if we get this right. Oh dear. Hang on, I'm going to go back a minute. Let's try that again. I just put the wrong one up. There we go. Yeah, so what Harriet asked me to talk about was growing fruit trees in particular. So very specifically about how fruit trees grow and how you choose different types and rootstocks and pollinators. So I'm going to really focus on that. And just to start with, Harriet, earlier on you mentioned Blue Peter. So this is one that Harriet and I prepared for you a few years ago. So this is at Dartington Hall Estate, and these are fruit trees, 20-metre spacing, alley cropping across an arable field with a north-south orientation, and each row of apple trees are a different variety. And we've also got elder, or luscums have got elderflower in that field. So I'm really just focusing on different types of fruit trees. So when you grow fruit trees, they tend to come in 3 sizes. It's a bit more nuanced than that, but we have standard trees, semi-vigorous trees, and dwarf trees. And so if you're growing standard trees, this is a cider orchard. This is a very traditional ancient form of agroforestry that is found in the West Country in particular. They're tall trees. They have obviously apples on them, and you can graze underneath when you're not collecting the fruit. Now the fruit with cider and perry, so the next one here is perry. If you haven't heard of perry, it's used to be sold as baby sham. It's really beautiful trees. Amazing biodiversity in these orchards, and they don't look too dissimilar to what James just showed us, but instead of timber trees, they're fruit trees. But obviously these are huge trees, so when you collect this fruit, because it's for fermentation, you come along in the autumn and you literally shake the tree with a large machine. The fruit falls to the ground and you pick it up with another machine, and then it's washed and fermented. So the fact that it's fallen to the ground and it's bruised is not a problem. These are not trees that you can pick by hand. So you can easily graze underneath on the sward with livestock, with cattle or sheep. The trees need protecting when they're young, and I'll encourage you to go to the agroforestry open weekend, because I've omitted to put the slide in, but I think Helen Browning has planted, with Ben Raskin, has planted perry pear trees in agroforestry rows, again alley cropping, and in their early years they're protected with electric fences because the cattle would just eat them. But once they're big enough, they don't get damaged by the livestock. If we look at the slightly smaller trees, so semi-vigorous trees, so this is another form of livestock called children. They need 2 legs, but they love running through these orchards. So this is an orchard that I planted in Essex about 30 years ago. Trees are a bit bigger than that now, but semi-vigorous trees are used for what we call dessert fruit. And dessert fruit is the stuff that we eat. So this really needs to be picked from the ground, or maybe a step, or just a very small few steps up a ladder, or the back of a trailer on the back on a tractor. So that means they're always going to be low, and therefore they can be grazed easily by cattle and sheep. So it's not a great idea to combine these with livestock, with cattle or sheep, because unless you've got excellent protection and guards, the chances are you can lose a lot of your fruit very quickly if your electric fence goes down, for instance. So these systems tend to be much better combined with poultry. So this is an orchard in Sussex called Brambletie, and so you can see these are even smaller trees. These are probably what's called semi-dwarf, so not somewhere between dwarf and semi-vigorous, and they have an egg laying flock that goes up and down in the alleyways there. Now, the reason I include this is because if you are eating those apples, you really don't want them anywhere near chicken and chicken poo or chicken feces, because of course that will give you a nasty tummy ache. So with all of these systems, you have to remove the livestock well before the harvest period, and then you can put them in afterwards. And the livestock, the chickens or poultry in particular, if you put them back into the orchard after you've cropped the apples, so the damaged apples will, those with codling moth or plum moth, tend to mature early and fall to the ground, where that pest pupates over the winter. So you put your chickens back in the autumn post-harvest, and they will quite often break the life cycle of that pest before it hatches again in the spring and reinfests your crop. So you can use the livestock in these systems as as pest control for your orchard. And of course you can see there's quite what's called a floriferous sward in orchard language, lots of wild flowers in there. So as James said, you can put pollinator strips underneath these trees, and indeed in the sward in between, and so you can also stack beehives into these systems and get a good crop of honey as well. Row orientation. So again, as James said, north-south for maximum light penetration into the crop. So it's actually the crop of fruit. you know, in the UK really needs a lot of sunshine. So the fruit really needs to be on a north-south axis if possible. Of course, that also allows more fruit to penetrate in between the rows. So if you're cropping there with an arable crop or a horticultural crop, then that also gets the maximum amount of light. Now, if you've got livestock, they don't always like to have, you know, they quite often want a little bit of shade. So then that might become problematic. If you have a slope, then it becomes a more complex decision as to whether to put the trees across the slope, where you know, where it will also provide a little bit of water management, or whether you go for the north-south orientation for the light penetration. If you've got a slope, then clearly the light will still get into the crop, but more on one side than the other. So so that becomes a more complex decision that is very site specific. What is also related to the row orientation is that fruit trees need shelter. They don't like a lot of wind, partially because of bees need to be able to pollinate the crop, and if it's too windy they won't. But also once the trees are the fruit is ripening, they can be damaged by high wind. So combining fruit orchards with shelter belts, you know, usually on the southwest, is also a good idea. So you can get lots of nice complex agroforestry in one site. In terms of spacing, so if you're doing alley cropping, you're farming a large arable crop, or you've got livestock, you're really looking to have 20 to 24 meters between the rows. Now, if you're working on a horticultural scale, then that could go down to sort of 16 meters or possibly even 12. I haven't included a picture here, but the Schumacher College, Henrysfield, has just 12 meters between the rows, and they grow vegetables in between. But Martin Wolf, we saw a slide from his with James, found that the 12-meter spacing was just a bit too small. So you probably want to go a weeny bit wider than that if you're a horticulturalist. If you're looking at in the row itself, if you're growing standard trees, the large trees, you'd need 10 meters between the trees in the row. And if you're looking at semi-vigorous trees, you would go down to 4 meters. And in my experience, I wouldn't really recommend doing the dwarf trees in an agroforestry system, just because the agroforestry systems tend to be a little bit more challenging in terms of growing systems. And dwarf trees are really bred to go in super intense, highly fertilized, herbicide sprayed off strips. And so they often don't thrive in agroforestry systems. So better to go for a semi-vigorous tree and then prune it if it gets a bit too big. Another aspect to think about with fruit trees is pollinator groups. So this is quite complex when you don't really understand it, but in effect it's really simple. So apple trees, well, all of the fruit trees are organized into pollinator groups, and literally it's 1 through to 5. So what that means is that if you've got an apple tree that's in pollinator group 1, it's the first one to flower, and it's got a 2-week flowering period, and then that overlaps with flowering period 2, and flowering period 2 overlaps with 3 and 1, and so on, 5 being the latest blossom. Now, that doesn't relate to when the apple actually ripens. That's a different order of ripening. So when you're choosing fruit trees, what you need to do is make sure, in order to get cross-pollination, you need to choose 2 different varieties that are next to each other as pollinator groups. You can include crab apples in the mix, and but they also need to be basically blossoming at the same time, because most fruit trees aren't self-fertile, a few are. So how do you know what those flowering periods are? Well, that didn't come through very well, but anyway, the National Fruit Collection, I often refer to myself as a fruit nerd, and anyway, you can go on their website and put in the search bar what variety you're looking for, and they will tell you what flowering period it has. So obviously, if you're growing this in Kent, or if you're growing them in Scotland, the date will be different, but it's not the exact date, it's just the period, whether it's early, mid or late. If you put beehives into the orchards or near the orchards when they're flowering, it helps cross-pollination, and as I mentioned already, creating sheltered environments encourages the bees to do their job. Now, one of the most complex issues with I don't know if you can see this, but with fruit trees is understanding the concept of rootstocks. So trees, the actual variety of tree that you buy, so let's say Cox's orange pippin is one we all know, is actually a cloned tree. There was a Mr. Cox discovered a pippin, a small tree grown from a seed centuries ago, and ever since then, that tree, that clone, because fruit trees don't root on their own roots, so you can't take cuttings. So what you do is you graft them onto rootstocks. And I've stolen this from the FP Matthews website. And if you're choosing fruit trees and rootstocks, I'd highly recommend you go and look on their websites. It's a huge amount of information. So I don't know if you can see there, but there's a man, or a woman, I should say, standing there. That is very tall. It's nearly 3 meters tall in that picture. But you can see how they've sized the trees from very dwarf, dwarf, semi-dwarf, medium, semi-vigorous, vigorous, very vigorous, and in relation to human size. So it's my suggestion that you go for sort of medium up. And so deciding on what your choice is for size of tree is you have to make sure you choose the right rootstock. So you could choose, for instance, a Cox's orange pippin on a very vigorous rootstock, which is M25, or you could choose a Cox's orange pippin on a semi-vigorous rootstock, which is MM109. So those letters refer to East Malling and a man called Mr. Merton, who did a lot of these breeding trials. And the numbers just refer to the number that these were in a trial, but they've stuck. So you can see underneath there, they also list other rootstocks for other types of fruit, like apple, apricot, pears, peaches, nectarines, all sorts of other things. So the same applies to all the other types of fruit as well. So what's the difference between semi-vigorous and vigorous? Well, the size. Whether if you are wanting to combine the fruit with livestock, you'd be better to get a very vigorous rootstock, but then you will have a problem picking it. The other thing about these very large trees is that they take up to 20 years to come into full cropping, and they'll live to be 100 years old and be very beautiful, but they're very, very slow to come into cropping because they spend so much time growing. So you need to be a very patient person or be doing it for the long term. With those semi-vigorous or very vigorous trees, you also can get a capital grant from Countryside Stewardship. But if you're looking for dessert fruit, then better to go for semi-vigorous that you can pick from the ground. They start cropping in about year 6, and they've got a useful cropping life of 25 to 30 years. So when you're choosing your trees, you really need to pay attention to the rootstock that they're in to make sure you get the right size for what your, again, as James said, what your objective is. You know, are you wanting trees to provide shade and coupled with grazing with livestock such as sheep or cattle? Then you might want to go for the vigorous or very vigorous standard trees, or if you're wanting dessert fruit, then going for the smaller ones and combine that with poultry. If you want to combine it with cattle or sheep, then you need to really take care to get the right guards in place. Choice of varieties, I think I've spelt that wrong, but forgive me. But when you're choosing varieties of apples, again, your objective will help you decide what to choose. But obviously, we tend to want to choose apples that taste nice. If you're choosing apples for cider or perry, they don't taste nice. They're very high in tannins. They are very specific varieties that are bred for fermentation. But normally it's easy to sell an apple that tastes nice. The harvest season. So I mentioned the pollination season, but the harvest season, the earliest apple can be picked in July. And you obviously the main season for picking apples is September, October. Apples that are picked in October, some of them are late ripening varieties, so you put them in the cold store, and they actually ripen in the cold store right through to Christmas. So I always try and pick all our fruit by half term, basically, and then you put it in the cold store, and then it ripens slowly, and it's very easy with just a simple cold store to store and sell fruit to kind of February, March, with very uncomplex storage systems, just as I said, a cold store. We combine that with a very simple juicing system. So the blemish fruit we just juice and sell it as apple juice, which is very popular. So I think it's very useful to have a spread of harvest season. So we sell our fruit direct to our customers for local sales. So we start picking in August with a variety called Discovery, and some of our varieties will be ripening in the cold store and be ready sort of January, February time. So I tend to have quite diverse cropping, as I said in the broadlears. We have each rose a different variety, and that also spreads the risk of disease and damage. Disease resistance is absolutely key. I'm not sure if this is, especially if you're growing in the West Country, unless you're in the Southeast. Well, even there, scab is an issue, canker is an issue. So it's much easier to just choose a variety that is resistant to scab and canker than have to spray it with pesticides. A lot of heritage varieties, the disease resistance has broken down. So actually, sort of slightly counterintuitive, it's sometimes, well, mostly better to use the new varieties where the disease resistance to scab and canker is still intact. Often these old local varieties, they're lovely, but they do get very spotty. Yield, of course, is another issue. So you know, farming, you need apples with a good yield, and I've just linked there a couple of suppliers that I use quite often: Adams Apples in the southwest, and Frank Matthews up in the Midlands. Both have got a huge amount of information on their websites as to the varieties that they're supplying, what they taste like, what their harvest season, disease resistance. You won't find yield data on there though, unfortunately. And just to say, you know, I've been doing this quite a long time. These are the varieties that I enjoy, that work really well, that tend to be quite robust, and I tend to put them all on semi-vigorous rootstocks. Obviously, I'm just focused on apples for this, so plums, pears. I mean, we grow peaches and apricots as well. Some of them in tunnels. And what's nice if you're doing that, you know, I've written local varieties. I've just said they don't always work very well, but you know, you can put, if you're planting 1,000 trees or planting 500 trees, you know, you can plant 20 or 30 of local varieties. Apple Days are very, very popular events, and so we often put all our varieties out, invite people to come and taste them. We do a bit of apple juicing, and it's a really lovely way to do public engagement with your customers or your community. So that's my presentation.
Thank you very much.
Can I just add one more thing? Sorry, James, I just made a note here. James, you mentioned about sourcing, about climate change and weather. So Martin Crawford, who's forest makes forest gardens, he's now going to about 100 miles south to France, a bit like you, to find apple varieties that he think will be more suited to our changing climate. And exactly like you, I would suggest diversity is the key, because you'll always have a more resilient system. So I've really finished now.
That was fabulous. Thank you so much, Marina. So now we're open to Q&A. So some people have put some questions, including myself, in the chat as we've been going along. So I think if we bash through some of those first, James, because I'm hoping you might have had a chance to read them while Marina was talking. And then if anybody else wants to put any questions in the Q&A, or when we're done with those, we'll go to hands or something and see what people would like more information on. So James, do you want to start by picking one up off the chat, or do you want me to read one out to you?
It's absolutely fine. I'm just going to work my way through them, if that's okay. From the top, I've been making some notes. Thank you, Marina. That was really good. I am not a fruit. I'm not that well experienced with fruit trees. So that was really, really genuinely interesting. Harriet, the first question was from you, about alternative stocking for ash. Again, it goes back to the very first point I made. It depends what your objective is from it. If you're looking for soil quality improvement, then you could look at aspen, sycamore, field maple, alder, lime. If you're just looking from a tree height or pollen or nectar point of view, you could go wych elm, birch, rowan, or just a general tree replacement. You could go oak or beech or sycamore or birch or hazel. I think like there's quite a variety. It does depend what you're looking for. If I'm going from a purely timber point of view, and this might be a little bit of a wild card suggestion, I really like shagbark hickory. It's unsurprisingly, it's not native, but absolutely cracking timber, absolutely cracking, and very similar in its component, in its kind of use and properties to ash. So that would be my wildcard suggestion. Sam Vincent asked, how long would you leave willow from establishment before browsing? The way I would put it, I purposely haven't touched too much on establishment because I'm just conscious of the time. I could speak for hours, I'm afraid, on a lot of this stuff. I didn't talk about guarding in any detail. But with the right with like maybe a cactus guard or a metal wire guard, you plant the willow, and then I would say they can kind of browse it from the moment they can get to it as it kind of grows out through the guard and up over the guard. I was at a dairy farm a couple of weeks ago, where they have willow for tree fodder, as well as the general shade and shelter, and they manage it by pollarding. So that the tree gets up to a certain height, they cut it kind of at cow height, cow head height. So the bottom branches do get grazed throughout the year, but then when it comes to winter, they pollard it and feed the hay, the tree hay to the cattle from throughout. As long as there's an element of guarding, I think kind of year 2 or /3 onwards, it'll be fine to be browsed. Again, it comes to that how heavily it's being browsed. You need to manage it just as you would the pasture browsing.
James, as the next question was also from me,
yes.
I'm going to suggest that maybe we let other people have a shot. And there are a couple of new questions that popped in at the bottom. So I think there's a question to both of you actually from Christian. To maximize ROI, is it better to produce products for a specialized market, i.e. heritage fruit, specialist timber, or do the economies of scale make standard markets for products financially feasible? I'm also going to take this as a shameless opportunity to plug that our final session, which I think is in August, will be on marketing from your agroforestry project. So we will also come back to that as a session topic as well. But do either of you want to answer Christian's question?
I can
Anybody jump in?
happily answer from a timber point of view. Basically, yes, you need to specialize. You're not operating at a scale where, you know, I purposely, I haven't avoided productive conifers. There is definitely a place for them. I think there's a really key place for them in agroforestry systems, but this is not the place for copy and paste Sitka spruce plantation forestry, because you're just not operating at the scale. You won't be able to make it work financially, really. I would absolutely go for a more specialized timber. I made a note of, there's a couple of points I didn't say during my presentation I was kicking myself for. One was, there is always a market for quality timber. Full stop. Absolutely full stop. We are so lacking at self-sufficiency with our own timber products in this country. There is absolutely a market. A species I didn't mention that I kicked myself out was wild cherry, for example, especially in a tree row system. Wild cherry is brilliant in that system because it needs that formative pruning. So that tree alley system makes it so easy to access both sides of the tree. So it's easy to prune. You will grow a beautiful, straight, long bole, stemless bole. Absolutely wonderful timber, and there is definitely a market for it. It's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario with timber markets. The market won't be buying a product if that product doesn't exist, but people won't be planting that product if there isn't the mills buying it. You know, it's one needs to come first, and I generally err on the side of the tree needs to come before the mill. But I would definitely be looking to specialize, is my short summary of that long-winded answer.
No, it's a great one. And Marina, would you agree from a kind of fruit crop perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I would suggest you want to be looking at a minimum of 500 fruit trees, really, to make it economically viable, you know, to actually have enough fruit to I mean, obviously it depends what your market is, but in my experience, you know, you'd really want sort of 500 to 1,000 trees to have enough fruit to make you viable. So, and obviously selling direct to your customers, you get a much higher cut of the money. Well, you get all of the money, basically. It's not a higher cut, you get all of it. And if you register it as organic, you know, you'll get even more money. So just to give you an example, if you're selling fruit for juicing, you're lucky if you get 50 pence a kilo. And if you're selling it direct sales as organic fruit, you'll be getting £3.50 a kilo. So it really depends on your market. I think almost more than the economy of scale, if that makes sense. Yeah, so if you've got enough market that you can sell, I mean, you know, we combine it with veg growing, and we've got 150 customers, or about 250 customers a week, and yeah, with about 1,000 fruit trees, we have enough fruit to supply them for about 5 months of the year, if that makes sense.
And this might be a familiar question too. Speaking of fruit trees, your feelings on the potential of things like almonds and apricots as we experience climate change?
Yes, so Harriet and I have had this conversation. So I've planted apricots in Devon. I haven't had any fruit yet because we tend to have especially this year, late cold springs, and they flower early. I know in Essex and Kent, they are picking apricots. I used to grow apricots in Essex, and about 1 year in 4, I would get a really good crop. So what I'm thinking about potentially in Devon is maybe putting a caterpillar tunnel over them when they're in blossom, just to warm them up a bit, because once you've got that fruit set, they would thrive. We are picking, we've got a really good peach crop this year. Those are in a polytunnel, down the middle of a polytunnel. It's a bit like agroforestry in a polytunnel. It's the polar opposite of what you're doing, James. but I in my experience, we've got 500 square. The trees that I've got, I can probably pick 200 to 300 kilos of peaches a year from them, you know, and at £10 a kilo, it's worth it. So apricots outside in the southwest, I think, are a bit marginal. Almonds also a little bit marginal, but in the southeast, they're not. Would be my short answer.
Well, and there's another question which is sort of for both of you, which is about nut trees. So any thoughts on nut trees? Particularly, is it possible to grow trees, e.g. walnuts, for a crop for timber, or do they need to be and nuts, so to double cropping essentially, or do they need to be managed differently in order to double crop them? I don't know if Marina, do you want to keep on with the nut theme, and then we'll hand it over to James for the timber perspective?
Yeah. Well, I think you're probably more of an expert, Harriet, on nuts. So I know that if you're buying a walnut tree for timber, it costs you know, a few pounds. And if you're buying a walnut tree for nuts, it will cost a lot more money, like £30 or £40. So it would, so they're different varieties. So you'd need to buy a walnut for nutting if you wanted walnuts rather than a timber walnut, if that makes sense. And so I guess once the walnut tree had stopped fruiting and nutting, you could probably use it for timber. Why not? But normally they're grown in two different systems. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would be hard pushed to see how you could get both out of the tree, because you would be managing and potentially pruning the walnut in both of those systems, but very differently, as well as that initial starting seed source, you know, as but the pruning would be very different with the, you know, I'm thinking particularly like black walnut, for example. Yeah, you're always looking to grow as straight and taller stemless bole. Basically, you want a nice clean long trunk, basically. Yeah. Whereas, and again, I'm not a tree nut specialist in any way. I imagine if you're managing a walnut tree for the nut crop itself, you're pruning it in a very different way to keep it kind of relatively low level, so it's manageable. You know, I just wouldn't see those two kind of management systems working currently. Maybe there is work or experimentation to be done about that happy middle ground potentially, but with the value of a good quality walnut timber, I would just look to manage it for timber personally.
Yeah.
I'm going to slightly abuse my position as chair here, but because I'm curious. I mean, to be honest, we've been planting lots of nut trees, but not for timber, for fruit. But because we were looking to high prune them to keep them outside of the reach of the cows as much as possible, because we're going to shake and catch them rather than hand pick them, then hopefully we'll have about at least kind of 6 feet, maybe more, like a couple of meters of more. I mean, worst case scenario, I figure we can use them for firewood, but just to
no, that is criminal. That's absolutely criminal. If you're looking at managing any broadleaf for productive timber, I think you're looking at an absolute minimum of 3 meters clean trunk, and that is real minimum. You want to be aiming 6 meters really. If you can get up to 12 or 15, brilliant. You know, I'm not sure 6 foot is quite going to cut it.
Yeah, I feel an experiment coming on now. I feel like a 3 meter experiment coming on. Yeah, we'll see what the yield difference is. We'll do like half 3 meters and half not. Yeah. Okay, well, we'll see. All right, let someone else ask some questions. There is a sort of lateral move to tree consumption for livestock. So I'm just going to nip back back to the top of the questions. So John Tucker was looking for some clarity from you, James, about whether regulatory issues around grazing in woodland and like what was the significance of the 10-year period you mentioned. And then he also said, and I would concur, can you give more detail about the work underway on palatability issues in trees? And I hope you're about to make me really happy if you're telling me that someone's actually going to publish some decent information on this. But I'm going to also squeeze in, there was a question about with the wild cherry that you mentioned, James, like could the shoots of that be browsed off by livestock? And then someone else has jumped in and said probably not. It's probably a bit not great for them.
That was me.
Okay, that was you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, that's fine. It's absolutely fine.
Well, I'll leave you to crack on with John's question.
Yeah, no worries. So, John, really brilliant question. I'm going to caveat my answer first. I work for the Forestry Commission, so I'm only England focused. So I'm afraid my answer might not necessarily apply to Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. I'm afraid it's only England I can really talk about. So that's the first caveat. That 10-year period. So that 10-year period that 10-year period I mentioned was more to do about the trees being established enough to be able to survive the grazing in there. This, I'm afraid it comes down to, it depends on the species, it depends on the density, it depends on the site, location, ground conditions, on whether those trees would still need to be guarded, what level of guarding they would need, the amount of grazing you'd be able to do within there. But the 10-year period is a rough point to point at where it's the trees are established enough to survive it. From a regulatory issue, for example, if you had created a new area of woodland using the Commission's Woodland Creation Offer, the England Woodland Creation Offer, you have an obligation period to keep livestock out of there for 15 years. That's just an obligation period that comes with that grant. And obviously, depending how you've funded what you've put in, that obligation period might be different. I'm just having a look to see what else there was mentioned. But from a regulatory point of view, the key thing that I mentioned was you cannot deforest. You can't cause any deforestation, and that's where it really comes down to how you're managing that grazing. So it might be, as I said, if you have goats, for example, you would need permanent guarding. The answer about work underway on palatability, that really is just me trying to collate all of the different kind of research and information about it into a central accessible location. And that really is a large component of my role here at the Commission. Is there are brilliant organisations dotted not just over this country but across Europe and the wider world who have done absolutely brilliant bits of work, and there's a lot of ground that's already been covered. The issue we're really finding is that it's just not particularly accessible. And that's where I really see my role, is trying to create that central focal point for anyone looking to do this to come in and get all the information they need from a single location. So I'm afraid the detail work is not anything more exciting than I am trying to put that work together as quickly as I can, both for the wider public, but also for all of our own operational delivery teams within the Commission, so that when they are working with farmers and landowners designing shelter belts and stuff currently, they can ensure that they are suggesting the correct species that are not going to cause any negative effects to the livestock, as well as potential positive benefits to the livestock.
Marie, there's a question from Sally that she was interested in the disease resistance that you mentioned specifically. I'm interested in the breakdown of resistance in heritage varieties. Do you find the choice of rootstock conveys significant benefit?
The rootstock doesn't affect the ability of a variety to resist scab or canker. So some rootstocks, so I didn't mention that, but if you've got a damp soil, fruit trees don't like damp soil on the whole, but there is, I think FP Matthews have got a rootstock that will cope with wet conditions, and the more vigorous the rootstock will cope with more rough soils or wet soils, damp soils. But the rootstock won't really affect scab or canker resistance on the variety that's grafted on the top of it at all. So it's basically the scab and the canker has adapted. You know, it's overcome the resistance that's in the tree, the genetic resistance in the tree.
Right. And James, so Marina just sort of deftly covered two questions there, both about disease resistance and about agroforestry systems on wet ground. James,
Yes.
did you have anything you wanted to add about kind of recommendations if you're dealing with a lot of flooding for kind of good tree mixes or good agroforestry designs?
More trees the better, basically. I would like to capitalize a bit on that wet ground, so brilliant for willow and alder, but you've got to look at some really really put a bit of work in to design some really good kind of without knowing any real information about that area. I can imagine a lot of kind of thick shelter belts, a lot of thick hedgerows, you know, a lot of systems that don't take out much agricultural land but put a lot more trees in. So the thick hedgerows, either the kind of the grid or row based infield trees, and you know, as much material as you can get in there to help hold the soil together as well as take up as much water as possible. And
are there any
talk to the landowners further upstream and get them to do the same. You know, that's, you know, you're looking at landscape wide work needing to be done there to manage water issues at that kind of level. You know, I'm afraid one farm is never going to be able to do the fix.
Are there any trees that you particularly recommend, James, is doing quite well in wetter ground?
Willow and alder. I go to, I'm afraid I sound like a broken record some of the times. I love willow and alder. They're in a farm setting. They're brilliant. You know, willow is so palatable, so many benefits to the livestock from a fodder point of view. Absolutely loves, both of them love wet ground, but willow especially. And then alder, it's all the nitrogen soil improvement benefits that go along with it. And Tim has made an excellent point there about it's all about working that soil.
Yeah.
You know, the soil's the thing that needs improving.
So we use alder a lot in my as a shelter belt. So we've planted fruit trees, you know, in an agroforestry system, but every now and then we put a row of alder in to as a windbreak. And one of my favourite alder facts is it's used for making clogs.
Willow as well, also good for some ramel wood chip.
Yes.
Whilst we have a kind of pause of questions coming in, I'm going to sneak back up to my question that I raised at the top, which is that, James, you mentioned that when you're planting your agroforestry rows, so your silver horticulture or silver arable rows, whereas when, you know, kind of Marina and I did your projects like Broadleys, we left about 1.5 meters on either side of the tree, kind of in the arable row. You suggested that with trees more aimed at timber, that should be more like 3 meters on either side. And this might be a really stupid, really obvious question. Are you saying that because those trees go taller and therefore they need a little bit more root stability than a slightly shorter kind of fruiting tree? Or why is it just that you think root pruning has a more negative impact on timber trees? Or what's the rationale for that?
So I definitely don't think root pruning has a negative impact on trees. If anything, I think it's a brilliant byproduct of silver arable systems is that root pruning that gets done, because that pushes the roots further down, because they're constantly, you know, the ends are constantly getting nipped off by the cultivation, so it pushes them further down, so you end up with far more stable trees. However, saying that, you can't have that root pruning too close. So in theory, the answer is yes. You know, the roots need room to breathe in a silvo arable system. You cultivate too close, you're just gonna you're gonna kill it, or you're gonna make it incredibly unstable. The weather will kill it. The other part of it is Actually, no, that was it really. Actually, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's all to do kind of with, in theory, you're looking for a much taller tree. With that in mind, I would be looking, and this comes down very species specific and what your end goal is with that tree. So if you're looking for a diameter of 60 centimeters and a clean bowl length of 12 meters, well, you're going to have, the best part of potentially 20 plus meters of tree there. If you're in a silver arable system, you need some pretty wide rows there so you are not losing the sunlight. So and again, it depends on the species you're growing and your target for that species. What you want that final product to be will massively influence the spacing in which you put those rows. So it's not only just that spacing from tree trunk to arable crop, which is important, but it is that spacing between the rows.
Great. Kate has asked a question about whether anyone's come across pistachios being grown in the UK that could be a future agroforestry crop. Marina's pointed it to Martin Crawford, but I don't know if I've even seen Martin having a go at pistachios. But if anybody knows of a pistachio agroforestry system in the UK, let us know. But then there's been also a question from Jan about whether there are particular species of willow and alder that are good for damp ground that are particularly stand out for cattle fodder. I don't know if that's something any of you have come across.
So willow, alder's sorry, I know I said willow. Start with alder. It's a strange one when it comes to fodder. It's got a lot of similar mineral and protein benefits that you find in willow. Not exactly the same, but fairly similar. But it's not actually that palatable. I don't know how many sheep and cows they interviewed on this, but apparently it's not that palatable. But so it's a bit of a strange one. From the fodder point of view, like all things, it'll be eaten if it's all there is to eat. I view that. But on that point, species that I really like for alder, kind of regardless of what you're using it for, common alder is nothing wrong with common alder. Absolutely great tree, but my money's really on Italian alder and even more so red alder. I went and saw a forest research trial plot a few weeks ago of the three species next to each other, and the common had grown really well. Italian was about half the height again. The red was almost double the height, all within the same time period. Absolutely brilliant growth rate on it. Willow, pussy willow, goat willow, osier willow. I'm never quite sure if I say that right. They'll all do really, really well from a kind of a wet, a moisture point of view. And pretty much all the willows are brilliant for cattle fodder, as well as goat, especially for bees. Really good for bees. And I totally agree with Marina about getting more beehives in to create that additional honey crop. I love that idea.
James, can I interject a little bit on the issue of alder? Just because, so
Please.
I was looking at some alder for agroforestry with the intention of coppicing it regularly.
Yes.
And one of the things that I read is that common alder coppices and pollards much better than Italian alder. And
Okay,
I'm wondering, I can't, it was only one article that I read, so I don't know if that's universally true. But part of my brain is saying, well, would a tree that coppices and pollards better and recovers better, therefore likely be a better fodder crop than a variety that doesn't coppice and pollard as well?
Almost definitely.
Yeah.
That logic I think is completely sound. That's really interesting. I've not heard that about that difference in coppicing. Even though I came to forestry through coppicing, I've never experienced coppicing alder. It's just never a species I've really played with from that point of view. But that's really interesting. But you're absolutely right. If a species coppice wells, it's got such a higher chance of surviving being a fodder tree. Absolutely.
I've also read that the basket tree willow, of which there are a huge number of varieties, but is particularly good for fodder. Fred has a question, which is, how do tree roots react to close post guards for tree protection? So I guess his question is, if you're, for example, as we've done on recent projects using the cactus guards, which are quite tight, you're putting posts then in quite tight to the tree. What impact might that have on the tree root development?
That is a really good question. I got to be honest, it's not something I really know about. Part of me thinks, because before I came to agroforestry world, I worked very much in the very much the kind of commercial forestry side of things, where we're putting in high density trees and stakes. To be honest, I'm not sure a huge amount, to be honest, because the actual post that goes in for a close guard is maybe an inch by inch, kind of wooden tree stake. It I wouldn't say it affects the roots too much, because by the time that root base is getting really substantial, the tree post, the guard and the post that go along with it are long gone. So for that kind of 10, potentially 15-year period that well, 15 is a bit long for a tree guard, but that period that it's there, I wouldn't say the root ball gets big enough to warrant it, to warrant any kind of impact, shall we say. Yeah.
Yes, with fruit trees, I just use quite small stakes because that allows the tree to develop its own strength. So just about 75 centimeters long, just batten wood 2 by 1, and then rabbit guards, and then we use like chain link tree guards, so we can loosen it off every year. But though, with fruit trees, you do need to loosen the tree ties every year, and then sort of remove them completely by about year 5 or 6. And I've never seen any damage at all from that. I mean, it's more you're likely to have more damage through not putting the tree stake on, because the tree will be blown about.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I've spoken. Sorry, I appreciate we get the end very, very quickly. I've spoken a little bit about cactus guards. They're these big metal wire guards. I'm hoping whoever's doing the talk about establishment will cover them. If not, I'll be in the audience and I'll be putting some pictures. I really think they're a game changer, and they're a much wider guard though. They're much bigger than the traditional plastic tubes you might think of.
Yeah. Can I just plug? We're doing an agroforestry walk on Saturday, 19th. If anybody wanted to come, and it's on the Apricot Centre website. You can book, and it's free. Am I allowed to say that? Oh, I've said it now.
Absolutely. I was going to say we've started quite like a niche chat about different alders, which I'm quite enjoying. But there is one last question which I might put to you, Marina. So it's really interesting information on alders, which is would fruit bushes be viable in an agroforestry system provided you have sufficient protection?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is called nowadays. This is called syntropic agriculture, agroforestry. So if you think of the forest garden type system with 7 layers, if you simplify that to 2 or even 3 layers and put it in a straight line, you're looking exactly that. And it was very traditional in orchards that you would plant blackcurrants between the fruit trees, because the trees take about 6 to 7 years to come into cropping. So you can use that space before that time with soft fruit bushes. So yeah, you can alternate the fruit trees with fruit bushes, gooseberries, blackcurrants, red currants, white currants, rhubarb. Just, you're only limited by your imagination, is what I used to, which I tend to think.
That sounds like a very positive note to end on, bang on time. So thank you both, Marina and James, for it was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you for a really, really good session. And I can see from the comments that everybody else really enjoyed it too. So yeah, really appreciate your time this evening, and thank you everybody to joining. So I put a couple of links just in the chat for lots of plugs. So as has already been mentioned, this weekend is the National Agroforestry Open Weekend. So there will be agroforestry sites open around the UK, and you can go on the website and find a site that is closest to you. As was mentioned, the agroforestry show is in September, and as I also mentioned at the beginning of this talk, this is part of a series that we're doing as the Farm Woodland Forum to kind of help people go through the design process for agroforestry. And so I would encourage you to sign up to the Farm Woodland Forum mailing list, or to even membership, if you so wish, to kind of keep on top of all of the emails about that. But I can tell you now that the next talk we're going to do is going to be on how you get other people to pay for your agroforestry. So it's funding your agroforestry. It's going to be quite intense because we have an expert from every part of the UK. We're covering England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and then we're covering private investment through carbon. So they're going to be on a very fast track to kind of give us the update about funding available in your area. But hopefully that will mean it's a session that's relevant to everybody. And in case I forgot to say when that is going to be the 20th of June. So mark it in your diaries now, and hopefully an email about that will be coming out soon. And I will also try and email out a link for this recording. But yeah, thank you very much to everybody for coming along tonight. Marina and James for speaking, and for such active questions from the audience. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you next month.
Harriet, it might be a good idea
Yes.
to keep the chat if you can. I think you can download